Very good. Welcome to the 60th anniversary, the Roswell. This thing has so many names I don't even know what to call it. The 60th anniversary Roswell UFO Incident Festival. Does that sound right? Good. Now, the title of this workshop, and we're going to try to cover just an amazing amount of material here. I may talk a little bit fast at times because I have a little more than 1 hour to do this, and therefore you may have to make your ears hear me fast. But the title to this workshop is called Nephilim, Stargates, and the Return of the Watchers. And right away, if you know anything about my past, you may question, why in the world would a guy like Tom Horn, who was a pastor for 25 years, who held executive level positions in one of the largest evangelical organizations in the world, why would a guy like this speak at an event like Roswell? I can tell you that I'm doing this because I believe that there is a phenomenon which has been occurring since the beginning of time, and it's real. And whether or not people are willing to face it or whether or not they're willing to discuss the issue, it has historicity, it has archaeology, it has a basis in fact from the beginning of time. And I have, even more than that, personal reasons why I have been interested in this subject all of my life. And so therefore, let me just go back very quickly and give you just a brief introduction into my family's background as to why a guy like me would be interested in the subject of Nephilim, the Stargates, alien abduction phenomenon, ufology, or any of the other associated material. And very quickly, my father fought in the Korean War, returned from the Korean War. My family had essentially settled the small Arizona town of El Mirage. Does anybody know where that town is? It's just across the dry Agua Fria riverbed from where Del Webb had built Youngtown, and then where later on Del Webb started building Sun City. And most of you are probably very familiar with Sun City, just off the Peoria, Glendale, Arizona, and so on. And so my father returned. He was positioned for a little while in California at Fort Ord, finally came back to the town of El Mirage, where he became the first police officer there. Later on was involved with the FBI, and furthermore, further on was involved with both this side and that side of the law, if you know what I mean. And but my dad had grown up in the Arizona desert, and he knew the desert like the back of his hand. He, as a child, had ridden the fence lines for the Bard Ranch, which was one of the largest open-range territory ranches in the state of Arizona. Coming back as a police officer, of course, he knew the state. He also was very close friends with some of the Indians in that area. And I'm telling you all of this to say that it was a surprise then when my father decided one day that he was going to go deer hunting, which he loved to do, and he went mule deer hunting up in the mountains in Arizona, came around a corner that he was somewhat familiar with, and all of a sudden, here was something he had never seen before. That paper that was just passed out up on the top left corner has a picture called Mysterious Mountain Holes, and I apologize for being very low tech in this presentation. My wife and I are on a 1-month road trip right now, and we did not have the ability to be able to put together a PowerPoint presentation. But I found this old picture. It was crumbled up. I tried to flatten it out as well as I could. My father had discovered these holes. They were very mysterious. These things were maybe 20 feet or more across. If you look at that picture, you'll see that there's deer that are in there that have gone down there to get a drink of water. They have fallen off in these holes and they can't get out. The deer had drowned. There were a bunch of these holes side by side. My dad had a military background, a police background. He had never seen anything like these holes before. And so took pictures of them, came back to El Mirage, contacted a representative from the Army Corps of Engineers, took this member from the Army Corps of Engineers out to see these holes. They also did not know how they had been made. They were surprised that the water, as hot as it is in Arizona, that the water was staying inside of these holes, which illustrated that the holes had been made in a way that was not indicative of any kind of like mine drilling equipment that they were aware of, which would have cracked the rock and caused the water to be dispelled. My father said these holes looked almost as if a giant white hot ball had just pushed down into the earth. You can't see that from that old picture because it was crumbled and I straightened it out, and it has actually distorted how perfectly cylindrical these holes were. Now, I'm telling you that to tell you this, that the Army Corps of Engineers couldn't figure it out. The Indians who lived in Arizona in that area weren't even aware of the holes, which indicated these things had appeared almost overnight. There was no road into this area. There was no way to get equipment up there, which would have been able to produce these giant holes in the ground. And the Phoenix Gazette went out, took pictures of my father with his 30-06 rifle, which he had been deer hunting with, kneeling down beside these holes, and they ran an article called Mysterious Mountain Holes. Nobody came forward with any explanation. After the hubbub in the newspaper, finally it started dying off, and that would have been the end of the story, except that on November 5, 1975, a man by the name of Travis Walton was with a group of people who were doing some work for the local government up there, where they were clearing some of the trees. They were doing logging and had a local contract to do that. And one night after they had finished their work, they were going back into town when they described what they call as a very bright light hovering above the ground. And Travis got out of his truck. You probably know this story, left the crew who were with him behind. They didn't want him to approach the light. He did. He claimed that he was zapped by an inexplicable light beam of energy. The people who were with him were terrified, took off in fear back to the town. A few days later, Travis Walton came back again, and then his story was that he had been taken on board this extraterrestrial vehicle and subjected to a variety of physical examinations that pretty much go along with much of what has been reported in alien abduction phenomenon. I don't know, in fact I doubt, that my father or Travis Walton ever knew each other. I've never asked Travis. I have asked Stanton Friedman if he believes Travis's story, and he does believe that Travis is a very believable person. And I've often said, if there's one person you don't want on your tail if you're not telling the truth, it would be Stanton Friedman, because he certainly would expose you as being both a hypocrite and a phony. And that kind of went to the credibility of Travis. But here's why I connect these two in my own personal family. We were a very conservative Christian family, and it's important that you know that. Nothing in our worldview could prepare us for what would then begin to happen in our family. We were not allowed to have television. In fact, my mother spanked me for having a deck of cards. Furthermore, this was over 40 years ago. Roswell had happened, but Roswell, you know, died off very quickly. And it wasn't until Stanton and Moore came along later and made this an issue again. There was no widespread definitions of what we would call now alien abduction phenomenon. But when my father came back and that discovery had been made, literally within 3 or 4 days, my aunt, who was a complete unbeliever, came to our home, terrified. She didn't know what she had saw. She thought maybe something angelic. And my mother told me this story years later about her coming to the home, but she had saw a silvery object hovering above our home, and it scared her. And she came to the home, face ashen white, and my mother, who was very religious, I think my aunt was actually trying to get God to somehow protect her or something from whatever was happening, because she didn't know. But literally a few days after that, and this I do remember very well, being in bed, a young man, late at night, maybe 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, and all of a sudden my sister began screaming in a way that you would never want to hear a young girl scream. Absolutely, even to this day, thinking back about it, will make the hair stand up on the back of my neck. I jumped out of bed, my brother jumped out of bed, my father and mother jumped out of bed. We ran to her room, and here is my sister. Very young girl. She's got the blankets pulled up by her face, and she has a look in her eyes that years later, when I'm now studying psychology and I'm entering the ministry, I would be able to look back on and identify as a person who was in shock. Somebody who had experienced something that was beyond their psychological ability to be able to handle the experience, to be able to make it mesh with their worldview.